How does a company transfer collapse because of a cup of coffee and a man falling from a ladder? Why did a gardener's whisper make me realize my own son and daughter-in-law were quietly preparing to take control of my life and assets? This is how I stopped the signing and left each of them with nothing. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my home office as I arranged the succession documents one final time. 43 years of building PierceIndustries, and today I would hand it all to my son, Jared. At 62, I'd earned the right to step back, to watch the next generation take the reins. The leather portfolio containing the transfer papers sat precisely centered on my mahogany desk, every clause reviewed, every contingency planned. What I hadn't planned for was how little my son seemed to know about his own succession. "Dad, Isla has everything organized," Jared had said the night before, avoiding my eyes as he spoke. "She's handled all the details. Isla, my daughter-in-law of 6 years, a woman who possessed the peculiar ability to answer questions before they were asked and finish conversations before they began. I'd attributed her take-charge attitude to efficiency, perhaps even admired it. Jared had always been more follower than leader, content to let others chart the course while he provided steady support. But as I walked toward the dining room that morning, something felt different. The usual pre-meeting energy was absent, replaced by an odd tension that seemed to emanate from Isla herself. "Good morning, Pierce," she said, her voice carrying that practiced cheerfulness I'd grown accustomed to. She was already seated at the head of the table, my usual spot, with a folder spread before her. Jared sat to her right, studying his phone with unusual intensity. "Morning," I replied, taking the seat across from them. "Ready for the big day?" Isla's smile widened. "More than ready. I've prepared the agenda, coordinated with Harold Stein's office, and arranged for the board members to witness the signing." She gestured to the folder. "Everything's here. Timeline, documentation sequence, even the media announcement for next week." I glanced at Jared, expecting him to add something, perhaps share his own thoughts about taking over the company we'd discussed countless times. Instead, he nodded along with Isla's words, as if hearing the plan for the first time himself. "That's thorough," I said carefully. "Jared, any concerns about the transition timeline?" Before my son could respond, Isla leaned forward. "Actually, we think it's perfect. The sooner we finalize everything, the sooner you can truly relax. You've worked so hard for so long." There it was again. We think. When had Jared's opinions become so seamlessly merged with Isla's that they spoke as a single entity? "Let me get you some coffee," Isla continued, rising smoothly. "I made your favorite blend." I watched her move toward the kitchen with practiced efficiency. In the brief silence, I studied my son. Jared was 34, capable, intelligent when he applied himself, but sitting there, he seemed diminished somehow, as if he'd grown smaller in the shadow of his wife's certainty. "Son," I said quietly, "this is your moment. How are you feeling about it?" Jared looked up from his phone, startled. "Oh, good. Yes, Isla's right. The timing works well." Isla returned before I could probe further, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "Here you go," she said, placing it directly in front of me. "Drink up while it's hot. We should head to the office soon. Harold's expecting us at 10:30. The coffee smelled rich, perhaps stronger than usual. I took a sip and noticed Isla watching me intently, as if my reaction mattered more than it should. "Delicious," I said, though something about the aftertaste seemed off. "You mentioned Harold's expecting us early?" "I moved the appointment up," Isla replied smoothly. "No point in prolonging things, right? The sooner we get this done, the sooner you can start enjoying your retirement." Again, that presumption of my timeline, my decisions. I set the mug down and reached for the folder Isla had prepared. The documents inside were meticulously organized, but I noticed they weren't the same papers I'd reviewed with Harold the previous week. These had additional clauses, modifications I didn't remember approving. "Isla, some of these terms look different." "Just minor clarifications," she interrupted. "Harold suggested them to streamline the process. Nothing substantial." I looked to Jared for confirmation, but he was absorbed in his phone again. When had my son become so disengaged from his own future? 20 minutes later, we were walking through the familiar halls of PierceIndustries. Employees nodded respectfully, some offering congratulations on my well-deserved retirement. Word traveled fast in a company this size, though I wondered who had spread the news so efficiently. The conference room had been prepared with ceremonial precision. Harold Stein, my attorney for over 2 decades, stood beside the polished table with Victor Haynes, my CFO, and 3 board members. The formal transfer documents were arranged in neat stacks, awaiting signatures that would legally shift control of everything I'd built. "Pierce," Harold greeted me warmly, then nodded to Isla and Jared. Ready to make this official? Almost, I replied, settling into my chair. The coffee from earlier had left me feeling slightly off balance, a subtle dizziness that I attributed to the magnitude of the moment. Isla took charge immediately, directing the seating arrangement and confirming the document sequence with Harold. I noticed she'd positioned herself between Jared and me, close enough to monitor both our actions. Before we begin, I said, I'd like to review the final terms one more time. Isla's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, but we've been over everything multiple times. Harold, didn't you confirm all the details yesterday? Harold looked puzzled. Yesterday? I thought we were doing the final review this morning. Minor confusion, Isla said quickly. The important thing is we're all here now. She opened the transfer folder and placed the first document before me. This is just the preliminary acknowledgement, she explained, her hand resting on my shoulder. Nothing binding yet. I picked up my pen, then hesitated. Through the conference room's large windows, I could see the company's landscaped courtyard where Mateo Alvarez, our longtime gardener, was working near the building's exterior. He was positioning a ladder against the wall, preparing to trim the upper branches of an ornamental tree. Isla followed my gaze and frowned slightly. Maybe we should close the blinds. Fewer distractions. But before anyone could move toward the windows, a sharp cry pierced the morning air. Mateo's ladder had shifted, sending him tumbling to the ground with a crash that echoed off the building's walls. "Oh my God!" Victor exclaimed, rushing to the window. I was on my feet immediately, my paternal instincts overriding any business protocol. "Call an ambulance," I instructed Harold, already moving toward the door. "Pierce, wait," Isla called after me, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Let security handle it. We should finish here first." I stopped and turned back to her. "A man is hurt, Isla. The signing can wait." Her mask of concern didn't quite hide the flash of irritation in her eyes. "Of course, you're right. I just thought, well, we've waited so long for this moment." But I was already heading outside, followed by the others. In the courtyard, Mateo was sitting up against the tree, clutching his left arm. His face was contorted with pain, but his eyes were alert, scanning the windows above us. "Mateo, don't move," I said, kneeling beside him. "Help is coming." As I reached for my phone to call 911, the gardener grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. His grip was urgent, desperate, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, meant only for me. "She told me to delay the signing," he said through clenched teeth, his eyes darting toward the building. "Especially after you drank the coffee." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Mateo, searching his face for any sign that I'd misunderstood. But his expression was utterly serious, filled with a fear that had nothing to do with his fall. "What did you say?" I whispered back. "The lady, your son's wife. She said to make noise, cause a problem, but only after you had the coffee. She said you'd need time to think clearly." A sudden chill coursed through me. The strange aftertaste, the subtle dizziness, Isla's insistence that I drink quickly. It all suddenly made horrible sense. "Sir?" Mateo continued, his voice growing weaker as footsteps approached behind us. "I'm sorry. I needed the work, but I couldn't let them. Pierce, is he okay?" Isla's voice carried across the courtyard, artificially bright with concern. I released Mateo's wrist and stood slowly, my mind racing. The ambulance sirens were already audible in the distance, but the emergency had shifted from Mateo's fall to something far more sinister. "He seems stable," I called back, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But we should wait for the paramedics." Isla approached with Jared trailing behind her. "Of course," she said, though I caught her checking her watch. "I just hate to see you stressed like this. Maybe you should sit down. You look pale." The irony was suffocating. She was expressing concern for symptoms she had likely caused. "I'm fine," I replied, studying her face with new eyes. "Though I think we should postpone the signing until this afternoon. I want to make sure Mateo is properly taken care of." For just a moment, Isla's composure cracked. "This afternoon? But Harold's schedule, the board members, everyone's here now." "They'll understand," I said firmly. "Some things are more important than paperwork." Jared finally spoke up, though his words seemed rehearsed. "Dad's right. We can wait a few hours." Isla's smile returned, but it felt forced now, like a mask hastily repositioned. "Of course. Family first, always." As the paramedics arrived and began treating Mateo, I stepped back to observe the scene with fresh perspective. Isla stood close to Jared, her hand on his arm, whispering something in his ear. Whatever she was saying made him nod repeatedly, like a student receiving last-minute instructions. The gardener caught my eye as they loaded him onto the stretcher. His slight nod confirmed what I already knew. This was no accident, and my son and daughter-in-law's concern for my well-being was far from genuine. The ambulance disappeared around the corner, taking Mateo and my last doubts with it. As the small crowd dispersed, Isla immediately began orchestrating damage control. "Well, that was unfortunate," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt. "But since everyone's still here, maybe we could just move forward. I mean, the poor man's in good hands now." Harold looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should reschedule, given the circumstances." "No need," Isla insisted, her voice taking on that commanding tone I was beginning to recognize. "Pierce is fine, aren't you? And Jared is ready. We've all invested so much time in today." I felt the subtle dizziness returning, a fog creeping around the edges of my consciousness. Whatever had been in that coffee was still working its way through my system, and Isla knew it. "Actually," I said slowly, "I think I need to lie down for a bit. The excitement, the stress. I'm not feeling quite right." Jared stepped forward, and for a moment I hoped to see genuine concern from my son. Instead, he echoed Isla's agenda. "Maybe just a short rest. We could reconvene in an hour or two." "Or we could wait until tomorrow," I suggested, testing their reaction. Isla's mask slipped again. "Tomorrow? But Pierce, you've been so eager to finalize this. You said yourself that you're ready to step back. Why delay what we've all been working toward?" The pressure was subtle, but impossible to miss. They needed this done today, while whatever they'd given me was still dulling my judgment. That realization cut through the chemical haze with sudden clarity. "I appreciate everyone's patience," I said to the room, "but I think it's best if we postpone this until I'm feeling more like myself." Harold nodded without hesitation. "Of course, Pierce, your health comes first." Isla's irritation was no longer fully hidden. "I just think you're overthinking it," she said. "You've already made the decision. Everything is prepared. Sometimes it's better to just follow through." The words lingered in the air, advice on the surface, pressure underneath. Jared said nothing. He didn't look at me. Back at the house, Isla insisted on walking me to the guest bedroom. Not my room, I noticed, but one where I'd be easier to keep an eye on. She smoothed the pillows with exaggerated care and adjusted the blinds. "Just get some rest," she said gently. "I'll check on you later, and don't worry about the business. Jared and I can handle anything urgent." After she left, I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I'd learned. The woman my son had married, the woman I'd welcomed into my family, had been quietly positioning herself to control not just the transfer of the company, but potentially my entire life. The guest bedroom felt like a cage, comfortable but confining. I could hear Isla and Jared talking in hushed tones downstairs, their voices carrying the urgency of people whose carefully laid plans had hit an unexpected obstacle. As the afternoon wore on, the effects of whatever I'd consumed began to fade, replaced by a sharp, cold anger. But I forced myself to remain calm, to think strategically rather than emotionally. If Isla was playing a long game, I needed to understand its full scope before making any moves. That evening, she brought me dinner on a tray, another gesture of care that now felt sinister. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Better, I hope? Jared is worried about you." "Where is Jared?" I asked. "Handling some calls about today. You know how these things get complicated when plans change?" I picked at the food, suddenly suspicious of everything she prepared. "What kind of complications?" Isla sat on the edge of the bed, her expression carefully concerned. "Oh, just rescheduling things. Harold had to move some appointments, the board members needed to adjust their calendars. Nothing major, but Jared wanted to make sure everything stays on track." "For tomorrow?" "Well, yes, assuming you're feeling better. You are feeling better, aren't you?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. She was assessing whether her plan could proceed, whether whatever she'd given me had achieved its intended effect. "I'm still a bit foggy," I admitted, letting her believe the deception was working. Maybe another day's rest would be wise. Isla's smile tightened. "Of course. Though I have to say, prolonging this seems to be causing more stress than relief, for all of us." After she left, I waited until the house grew quiet, then carefully made my way to my home office. The transfer documents were still there, but I noticed additional papers had been added, forms I didn't recognize with language that seemed designed to grant broad decision-making authority to Jared, or more accurately, to whoever influenced Jared's decisions. I photographed everything with my phone, then returned to the guest room to plan my next moves. If Isla thought she was dealing with a confused old man whose judgment was compromised, she was about to learn otherwise. But first, I needed proof, and I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal went. Sleep eluded me that night. Instead, I lay in the guest bed reconstructing the past several months with new perspective. Details I'd dismissed as Isla's helpfulness now revealed themselves as something far more calculating. The gradual changes in my routine, for instance. Isla had slowly taken over meal planning, insisting it would reduce my stress. She'd convinced our longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Merrick, to accept early retirement, then hired a new service that reported directly to her. Even my vitamin supplements had been upgraded to a more comprehensive regimen that Isla personally managed. I'd attributed these changes to her desire to help, perhaps even to prove herself worthy of joining the family business. Now I wondered if they'd been systematic steps toward control. I rose before dawn and moved quietly through the house to my office. The documents Isla had added to the transfer package made for disturbing reading. Buried deep in legal language were provisions for cognitive assessment and assisted decision-making, phrases that could be weaponized to declare me unfit if I pushed back against their plans. Even more troubling were the files I found on Jared's laptop, which he'd left open on the kitchen counter. Long email chains between Isla and several attorneys, none of them Harold Stein, discussed capacity concerns and transition management. Jared's name appeared on the threads, but the tone and phrasing were unmistakably Isla's. One message, sent just 3 days earlier, was especially chilling. The timeline needs to accelerate. O is starting to ask more questions about the details. L agrees we should proceed with the original plan ASAP. If there's resistance, we may need to explore the alternative options we discussed. Alternative options. I didn't like where my mind went. I photographed everything, then locked the originals in my personal safe, a place Isla didn't know existed. Whatever game she thought she was playing, I intended to record every move. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me back to the guest room. I slipped into bed and pretended to be asleep until Isla knocked softly. "Pierce, how are you feeling this morning?" "Better," I said, sitting up slowly. Still not quite myself, though. She entered carrying another cup of coffee. I had to fight the instinct to push it away. Instead, I accepted it with a polite nod, and when she turned toward the window, I quietly poured most of it into the potted plant beside the bed. "I've been thinking," Isla said, settling into the bedside chair with practiced ease. "Maybe we're approaching this wrong. Instead of a big formal signing, what if we just handled the essentials? Just the core transfer documents, nothing complicated." "What does Jared think about that?" "He agrees it might be less stressful for you. We could even do it here at home. No board members, no ceremony, just family." The suggestion sent alarm bells ringing in my mind. A private signing, away from witnesses, while I was supposedly impaired. It would be the perfect setup for whatever alternative options she'd referenced in her emails. "That's thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I think I'd prefer to stick with the original plan when I'm feeling completely clear-headed." Isla's expression flickered with impatience before she recovered. "Of course. I just hate seeing you struggle with this decision. You've already made up your mind, after all. Sometimes overthinking things just creates unnecessary anxiety." After she left, I called Dr. Nina Caldwell, my physician for the past 15 years. Nina had always been direct, ethical, and discreet, qualities I desperately needed right now. "Pierce," she said when I reached her private line, "what can I do for you?" "I need to see you today, privately, and I need some lab tests done." There was a pause. "Are you feeling all right? Any specific symptoms?" "Dizziness, confusion, fatigue. But Nina, I think someone may have given me something. I need to know what's in my body." Another pause, longer this time. "Come in through the back entrance at 2 o'clock. And Pierce, if you suspect deliberate tampering, we should consider involving the police." "Not yet. First, I need to know what we're dealing with." The rest of the morning passed in careful performance. I played the role of a confused patriarch struggling with a momentous decision, while Isla and Jared tag-teamed their pressure campaign. Jared seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being, but his suggestions consistently aligned with Isla's agenda. "Dad, maybe Isla's right about simplifying things," he said over lunch. "You always taught me that the best decisions are the ones you don't second-guess." "When did I teach you that?" I asked, genuinely curious. Jared looked uncertain. Isla mentioned you'd said that, about business decisions." "Isla mentioned I'd said it?" "Well, yes. She has a good memory for those kinds of details." I watched my son carefully. He wasn't lying exactly, but he was repeating someone else's interpretation of my words. How many of his recent decisions had been filtered through Isla's good memory? At Dr. Caldwell's office that afternoon, I provided samples for testing and described my symptoms in detail. Nina listened without judgment, taking notes and asking precise questions about timing, severity, and possible sources. The results will take a few hours, she said. But Pierce, if someone is medicating you without your knowledge, this is a serious crime. Are you safe at home? For now. But Nina, whatever you find, I need documentation. Official medical records that can't be disputed. You'll have them. Driving home, I felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. Soon I'd have proof, one way or another. But proof of what, exactly? That my daughter-in-law had been tampering with what I consumed, that my son was complicit in some scheme to take control of my company, that the family I'd tried to build and protect had been systematically betraying me. The house felt different when I returned, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. Isla greeted me with unusual enthusiasm. There you are. Jared and I have been talking, and we think we've found the perfect solution. She led me to the living room, where Jared sat surrounded by simplified transfer documents. Gone were the complex legal provisions, replaced by streamlined papers that looked deceptively straightforward. See? Isla said brightly. Just the basics. You sign here, Jared signs there, and everything's settled. No stress, no complications. I looked at the documents, then at my son. Jared, are you comfortable with this approach? Absolutely, he replied, though I noticed he glanced at Isla before answering. It's much cleaner this way. And Harold reviewed these? Isla answered before Jared could. These are based on Harold's original drafts. We just removed the unnecessary complexity. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Caldwell. Results ready. Call me. Excuse me, I said, standing slowly. I need to take this. In the privacy of my office, I called Nina back. Pierce, she said without preamble, you have lorazepam in your system. It's a benzodiazepine, commonly used for anxiety, but also known to cause confusion and impaired judgment in higher doses. How much? Enough to affect your cognitive function without causing obvious intoxication. Someone who knew what they were doing administered this. I closed my eyes, feeling the final piece of the puzzle click into place. Can you document this officially? Already done. I'm emailing you the lab results and my clinical assessment. Pierce, you need to contact the police. Soon. But first, I have some business to finish. When I returned to the living room, Isla and Jared were waiting expectantly. The simplified documents lay open on the coffee table like a trap waiting to be sprung. Everything all right? Isla asked. Perfect, I replied, settling back into my chair. Just perfect. But instead of reaching for the pen, I leaned back and smiled. You know what? I think I'd like Harold to review these one more time, just to be absolutely certain. Isla's mask finally slipped completely. Pierce, we've been over this a dozen times. You're overthinking everything. Just sign the papers. For the first time, her voice carried open command rather than suggestion. Jared looked uncomfortable with her tone, but he said nothing. Tomorrow, I said firmly. After I've had a good night's sleep? Isla stood abruptly, her patience finally exhausted. Fine, but Pierce, this indecision isn't healthy. For any of us. As she stormed from the room, Jared lingered behind, looking genuinely confused. Dad, are you okay? You seem different. I'm fine, son. Better than I've been in months, actually. Isla's just trying to help, you know. She wants what's best for the family. I studied my son's face, seeing the boy I'd raised struggling beneath years of subtle manipulation. Jared, what do you want? Not what Isla wants, not what you think I want. What do you want? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again as if the question had never occurred to him. I want to make you proud. You already have, I said softly. But son, making me proud and taking over my company aren't the same thing. That night, I didn't sleep in the guest room. I returned to my own bedroom, locked the door, and began making plans. Tomorrow, Isla would learn that some old men aren't as easily controlled as they appear, and Jared would learn that sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is save his child from their own poor choices. Dr. Caldwell's medical report made for sobering reading. The laboratory analysis confirmed lorazepam levels consistent with intentional administration over several days, possibly weeks. Her clinical assessment noted symptoms of cognitive impairment that would have made me vulnerable to coercion or manipulation. I forwarded the report to Harold Stein with a brief message. Need to see you immediately. Confidential matter. His response came within minutes. My office, 8 a.m. Back entrance. Harold had been my attorney since the early days of PierceIndustries. He'd guided me through acquisitions, contracts, and countless legal challenges. More importantly, he was one of the few people I trusted completely. Pierce, he said as I entered his private office. I have to say, yesterday's postponement was probably wise. Isla seemed unusually insistent about proceeding. That's what I need to discuss. I handed him the medical report and watched his expression grow increasingly grave as he read. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Someone's been secretly putting something into your system? For weeks, possibly months. And Harold, I think the succession documents have been modified without my knowledge. I showed him the photographs I'd taken of the additional papers, the emails from Jared's laptop, and the simplified transfer documents Isla had prepared. Harold studied everything with the methodical precision that had made him such an effective attorney. When he finished, his face was grim. Pierce, this isn't just about the company transfer. These provisions about cognitive assessment, assisted decision-making, someone's been laying groundwork to have you declared incompetent. Isla. It appears so, and if they'd succeeded in getting you to sign while impaired, he shook his head. The legal ramifications would have been catastrophic. What are my options? Harold leaned back in his chair, already shifting into strategic mode. First, we document everything officially. I'll prepare affidavits regarding the document modifications and timeline irregularities. Second, we revoke any powers of attorney or succession agreements that might have been compromised. And third, we make sure this never happens again. Over the next 2 hours, Harold and I systematically dismantled every legal avenue Isla had been constructing. We revoked Jared's position as heir apparent, updated my will to exclude both him and Isla, and activated revocation clauses in various gift deeds I'd executed over the years. The house they're living in, Harold noted, reviewing property records, it was a gift with a reversion clause. I remember. Isla insisted we add their names to the deed for estate planning purposes. Well, that deed is now void. Same with the vehicles, the investment accounts, everything. What about Jared? He's still my son. Harold's expression softened. Pierce, I've known Jared since he was a boy. This level of manipulation, he may not even realize what's been happening, but legally we have to treat him as complicit until proven otherwise. I understand. From Harold's office, I went directly to First National, where I'd banked for over 30 years. Margaret Torres, the branch manager, greeted me personally. Mr. Pierce, what can we do for you today? I need to review all account access authorizations, and I need some changes made immediately. Margaret led me to her private office, where we went through every account, trust, and investment vehicle associated with my name. Isla had been added as a secondary signer on several accounts, supposedly for convenience, and Jared had broad access to company operating funds. I want all secondary access revoked, I instructed. Everything requires my direct authorization going forward. Of course, though I should mention, there was some unusual activity yesterday. Several large transfers were initiated but not completed due to daily limits. A wave of cold fear ran through me. What kind of transfers? Margaret pulled up the transaction records. Moves from your personal accounts to a joint account shared with Jared and Isla. The amounts were significant, nearly $2 million total. Were they completed? No, the daily transfer limits prevented it, but the requests are still pending approval. Cancel them, all of them. Done. As Margaret processed the changes, I realized how close Isla had come to success. If the company transfer had proceeded as planned, if I'd been declared incompetent, she would have had access to everything. My phone rang as I left the bank. Isla's name appeared on the screen. Pierce, where are you? I came to check on you and you weren't in your room. Just running some errands. Feeling much better today. That's wonderful. Does that mean we can finalize things this afternoon? Possibly. I want to review everything one more time with Harold. There was a pause. Harold? But we simplified the document specifically to avoid more legal complications. I know, but I want to be absolutely certain. Another pause, longer this time. Of course. Though Pierce, all these delays, they're starting to affect Jared. He's worried you're having second thoughts about his capabilities. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired its effectiveness. She was using my love for my son as leverage, making my caution seem like rejection. Tell Jared not to worry, and everything will work out as it should. That afternoon, I drove to the company's records archive, a secure facility where we stored original documents and backup files. As founder and sole owner, I had unrestricted access to everything. What I found there confirmed my worst suspicions. Someone had been systematically copying ownership documents, board resolutions, and financial records. The access log showed regular visits from Jared over the past 6 months, visits I'd never authorized and that he'd never mentioned. I spent 2 hours photographing everything, building an irrefutable record of the attempted theft. Because that's what this was, not a family succession, but an elaborate heist disguised as inheritance. Driving home, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, cold and sharp, but it was tempered by clarity. I knew exactly what Isla had been planning, exactly how close she'd come to succeeding, and exactly what I was going to do about it. The house was quiet when I arrived. Isla's car was in the driveway, but I didn't see Jared's vehicle. I found Isla in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be a celebratory dinner. "There you are," she said brightly. "I thought we could have a nice family meal before tomorrow's signing." "Tomorrow's signing?" "Well, yes. You said you wanted Harold to review everything, and I called his office. He confirmed he could see us first thing in the morning." I doubted Harold had confirmed any such thing, but I played along. "That's efficient of you. I just want this to go smoothly, for everyone's sake." She gestured to the elaborate meal she was preparing. "Jared should be home soon. He's been handling some last-minute business details." "What kind of details?" "Oh, just transitional things. Employee notifications, vendor communications. He wants to hit the ground running once the transfer is official." Employee notifications, vendor communications. Isla was already treating the company as if it belonged to them, making decisions and announcements based on an assumption that the transfer was inevitable. "Isla," I said carefully, "what happens if I change my mind?" She froze for just a moment, a wooden spoon halfway to her mouth for tasting. "Change your mind? About what?" "About the succession. About retiring." She set the spoon down and turned to face me fully. "Pierce, you've been planning this for over a year. You've talked about wanting to step back, to enjoy your golden years. Why would you change your mind now?" "Maybe I'm not as ready as I thought." Isla's smile became strained. "But Jared is ready. He's been preparing, learning, taking on more responsibility. You can't just pull the rug out from under him." "It's my company, Isla. I can do whatever I think is best." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Isla's mask of concern was slipping again, revealing something much harder underneath. "Of course it's your company," she said slowly. "But you have to consider what's fair, what's right. Jared has invested years of his life in this transition." "Has he, or have you?" Isla went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." We stared at each other across the kitchen island, the pretense finally falling away. Isla's expression shifted from confusion to calculation to something approaching defiance. "Pierce," she said finally, "you're not thinking clearly. The stress of this decision, your age, the medications you've been taking." "What medications?" "Your supplements. The ones I've been managing for you. Sometimes they can cause confusion, especially in older adults." There it was, the setup for declaring me incompetent, delivered with clinical precision. "I see," I said quietly. Isla seemed to sense she'd overplayed her hand. Her smile returned, but it looked painted on now. "I'm just concerned about you. We all are. Maybe you should rest before dinner?" "Maybe I should." I left her in the kitchen and went straight to my office, where I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Harold, confirming our meeting for the following morning, not to review transfer documents, but to finalize the legal changes we had already prepared. The second was to Victor Haynes, asking him to schedule an emergency board meeting for the next afternoon. The third was to Building Security, instructing them to change all access codes and keycard permissions immediately. By tomorrow, Isla would learn that some games come with consequences, and Jared would discover that sometimes the most valuable inheritance a father can leave his son is the understanding that actions have consequences. But first, I had one last performance to deliver. Dinner that evening was a study in manufactured normalcy. Isla had cooked my favorite meal, or what she believed was my favorite, and Jared arrived with flowers and a bottle of expensive champagne. "To new beginnings," Jared said, lifting his glass. "To family," Isla added, her eyes fixed on me. "To truth," I said quietly, and caught the brief flicker in Isla's smile before it returned. Conversation drifted carefully, skirting anything that might spark tension. Jared spoke about plans to modernize company operations, though I noticed his ideas sounded strikingly similar to proposals Isla had been pushing for months. Isla talked about a charitable foundation she wanted to launch, funded, of course, with company resources, to support causes she felt strongly about. "I've always believed that wealth carries responsibility," she said, cutting her steak with precise, deliberate movements. "Don't you agree, Pierce?" "Absolutely," I replied, "although I think responsibility begins with honesty." Jared nodded eagerly. "Dad always taught me that integrity is the foundation of any successful business." "Did I?" I asked. "When did I teach you that?" He hesitated. "Well, it's something you've always believed. Isla and I were talking about it the other day." "Isla and you discuss my beliefs?" "Sometimes," Isla said smoothly. "Jared wants to be sure he's honoring the values you instilled. We both want to protect your legacy." The word legacy lingered in the air, less like a tribute and more like a claim, as if my life's work were already finished, something to be managed, interpreted, and redistributed by others. After dinner, Isla suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert. I accepted the coffee but didn't drink it, instead setting it aside when she wasn't looking. The subtle test confirmed my suspicions. She was still trying to medicate me, still working to ensure I'd be compliant for tomorrow's signing. "I've been thinking," I said, settling into my favorite armchair, "about what you said earlier, Isla, about fairness and what's right." Isla and Jared exchanged a quick glance. "Yes?" she prompted. "You're absolutely right. Jared has invested years in preparing for this transition. It wouldn't be fair to disappoint him now." Relief flooded Isla's face. "I'm so glad you see it that way. So tomorrow, we'll make everything official. No more delays, no more second guessing." Jared leaned forward eagerly. "Really, Dad? You're sure?" "I'm sure, son. It's time." Isla's smile was radiant now, victorious. "I think this calls for a celebration. More champagne?" As Isla busied herself in the kitchen, Jared moved closer and sat beside me. "Dad," he said softly, "I want you to know how much this means to me. I won't let you down." Looking at my son, I felt a deep, heavy sadness. He truly believed he was stepping into something he'd earned, taking on a role that was rightfully his. He had no idea he was being positioned as a figurehead, a convenient front for his wife's ambitions, a man meant to smile and nod while someone else pulled the strings. "Jared," I said quietly, "do you remember when you were 12 and wanted to quit Little League because you weren't the best player on the team?" He smiled, the memory clearly intact. "You told me quitting was easy, that learning from failure was what made someone strong. And what did you do?" "I stayed, practiced harder, made the all-star team the next year." "That's right," I said. "You earned it, through your own effort, your own determination." I paused, watching his expression carefully. "This company transfer, do you feel like you've earned it the same way?" His smile faltered. I think so. I've worked there for 8 years." "Working?" I asked gently. "Or being prepared to inherit?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, Isla returned, champagne glasses in hand, her expression bright with barely contained satisfaction. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" she asked. "Just reminiscing," I said, "about the importance of earning what you're given." "Oh, Jared has absolutely earned this," Isla said, settling beside him on the couch. "He's shown such dedication, such leadership potential. You should be very proud." "I am proud of Jared," I replied. "I always have been." Isla's smile widened, apparently missing the distinction entirely. The rest of the evening unfolded like a rehearsed performance. Isla guided the conversation, Jared echoed her enthusiasm, and I played the part of a patriarch finally at peace with his decision. When they said goodnight, Isla even hugged me, a gesture that required considerable restraint to return. "Thank you, Pierce," she whispered, "for trusting us with your life's work." "Trust," I replied evenly, "is earned." After they disappeared into their bedroom, I returned to my office and reviewed the documents Harold and I had prepared. A new will, revoked powers of attorney, restructured trusts, property reversions, every mechanism necessary to dismantle years of careful manipulation. Then I turned to the evidence I'd compiled: medical records, financial discrepancies, forged signatures, unauthorized access logs. Isla had been meticulous in her planning, but careless in erasing her trail. My phone vibrated with a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hope you're feeling better. Sorry about the accident. M. Mateo." I'd nearly forgotten the gardener whose staged fall had stopped me from signing while impaired. I made a note to ensure he was properly compensated for his courage. At midnight, I placed one final call. "Pierce?" Harold answered immediately. Everything all right?" "Perfect. Are we ready for tomorrow?" "All documents are finalized and notarized. The board meeting is set for 2 o'clock. Are you certain about this course of action?" "Harold," I said, "in 43 years of business, have you ever known me to act impulsively?" "Never." "Then trust me now. This is exactly what needs to happen." After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of genuine whiskey, not coffee laced with sedatives, and sat in the darkness of my office. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning Isla had been working toward, just not in the way she expected. I thought about Jared, sleeping upstairs beside the woman who had systematically manipulated him into betraying his own father. Part of me hoped he was truly innocent, a victim of Isla's schemes, but part of me knew that at 34 years old, willful ignorance becomes complicity. Either way, tomorrow he would learn that some lessons can only be taught through consequences. The house settled into silence around me, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched the hours pass and prepared for the most important business meeting of my life, the one where I would take back everything that had almost been stolen from me. Dawn was breaking when I heard movement upstairs. Isla and Jared were beginning what they believed would be their day of triumph. They had no idea it would be their last day in my house, my company, and my life. The morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same one I'd worn to sign the original incorporation papers for PierceIndustries 43 years ago. If today was going to be about legacy and succession, I wanted to look the part. Isla was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, preparing what she probably imagined would be our last breakfast together as patriarch and heir apparent. She hummed softly as she worked, radiating an energy I hadn't seen from her in months. "Good morning," she said brightly. "You look wonderful. Rested?" "I feel wonderful. Clear-headed." "Perfect. Harold's expecting us at 10, and I've arranged for the board members to witness the signing, just like you originally wanted." I accepted the coffee she offered, but didn't drink it. "Actually, there's been a small change of plans." Isla's hand paused over the cream pitcher. "Change?" "The board meeting has been moved to this afternoon, 2 o'clock. But the signing was supposed to be this morning." "It will be. Just the legal formalities with Harold first, then the ceremonial announcement to the board." Isla's smile returned, though it seemed forced now. "Of course. That makes perfect sense." Jared appeared a few minutes later, looking nervous but excited. He dressed formally as well, understanding the significance of the day even if he didn't understand its true nature. "Ready, Dad?" he asked. "More than ready, son." The drive to Harold's office passed in relative silence. Isla sat in the passenger seat, occasionally checking her phone and making what appeared to be final preparations. Jared rode in the back, staring out the window with the expression of someone about to take a leap of faith. Harold's receptionist escorted us directly to the conference room, where my attorney waited with Victor Haynes and Margaret Torres from the bank. Isla looked surprised to see them. "I thought this was just about the succession documents," she said. "It is," I replied. "Among other things." Harold stood as we entered, his expression professionally neutral. "Good morning, everyone. Shall we begin?" Isla took charge immediately, spreading her simplified transfer documents across the conference table. "These are the final versions," she announced. "Clean, straightforward, no unnecessary complications." Harold glanced at the papers, then at me. "Pierce, are these the documents you want to execute today?" "No," I said quietly. "They're not." Isla's head snapped toward me. "What do you mean?" "I mean these aren't the documents I'm signing today." Harold opened his briefcase and removed a different set of papers, the ones we'd prepared yesterday. "These are the documents Mr. Pierce wishes to execute." Isla reached for them, but Harold placed them directly in front of me. As I began to read aloud, her face went from confusion to alarm to something approaching panic. "Revocation of succession agreement," I read. "Effective immediately. All previous agreements regarding the transfer of PierceIndustries are hereby voided." "Wait," Jared interrupted. "Dad, what's going on?" I continued reading. "Amendment to last will and testament. Jared Pierce is hereby removed as primary beneficiary and heir to all business and personal assets." "Pierce, stop," Isla commanded, her voice sharp with authority. "You're not thinking clearly. You're confused." "Revocation of gift deeds," I continued. "All previous transfers of real estate, vehicles, and financial assets to Jared Pierce and Isla Pierce are hereby revoked and voided." Isla shot to her feet. "This is insane. Harold, you can't let him do this. He's been acting strangely for days. He needs a medical evaluation." Harold remained seated, calm and professional. "Mrs. Pierce, I've reviewed Mr. Pierce's medical records. Dr. Caldwell has confirmed that he's mentally competent and acting of his own free will." "Medical records?" Isla's voice cracked slightly. "What medical records?" I reached into my briefcase and removed the lab analysis report, the one showing lorazepam in my system, a sedative that someone has been giving me without my knowledge. The room fell completely silent. Jared stared at the report, then at Isla, then back at me. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your wife has been tampering with what I was consuming, son. Repeatedly over a period of weeks to cloud my judgment and make me easier to influence." Isla's mask finally shattered completely. "That's ridiculous. Pierce, you take supplements for your health. Sometimes older adults have reactions." "Supplements don't contain prescription benzodiazepines," Harold interjected, "unless they're added deliberately." Isla turned to Jared, desperation replacing calculation in her voice. "Jared, tell them. Tell them I would never do something like that. I love this family. But Jared was staring at her with growing horror. Isla, is this true? Have you been giving Dad something? Of course not. This is all some misunderstanding, some mistake with the tests. It's not a mistake, I said, removing another document from my briefcase. Just like these emails aren't a mistake. I placed printouts of Isla's correspondence on the table, the messages about capacity issues and alternative options, the discussions of accelerated timelines and resistance management. Jared read them with growing shock. Isla, these emails, they're from your account. I can explain. And these, I continued, producing the unauthorized access logs from the company archives. Records showing dozens of visits to secure areas, copying confidential documents, preparing for a takeover. Isla's composure cracked entirely. You don't understand. I was trying to help. Jared needed support, guidance. You were going to retire anyway. By tampering with what I was taking, by forging documents, by systematically stealing my company. It's not stealing, Isla shouted, abandoning all pretense. You were going to give it to Jared anyway. I just made sure it happened efficiently. Jared stood slowly, his face pale with shock and growing anger. Isla, what have you done? What I had to do, she snapped back. You were never going to take charge on your own. You're too weak, too dependent on your father's approval. Someone had to make the hard decisions. The words hit Jared like physical blows. Weak? Dependent? Yes. You've spent your entire adult life waiting for permission, waiting for approval. If I hadn't pushed this forward, you'd still be waiting when you're 60. So you interfered with what my father was taking? I gave him mild sedatives to help with his anxiety about the transition. It's not like I poisoned him. You interfered with what he was taking to steal his company. Isla whirled on Jared, her fury now fully unleashed. Our company, the company we were going to inherit anyway, the company you were too spineless to claim. Jared stepped back as if she'd struck him. Spineless? Yes, spineless. Weak. Pathetic. Do you think you could have run PierceIndustries without me? Do you think you can do anything without me? The transformation was complete. The caring daughter-in-law, the supportive wife, the concerned family member, all revealed as masks worn by someone capable of calculated cruelty. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue with the legal proceedings. I signed each document methodically while Isla and Jared continued their disintegration. The revocation of succession, the updated will, the property reversions. Each signature undoing years of careful manipulation. The house you're living in, I said as I signed the property revocation. It reverts to my sole ownership as of today. The cars, the investment accounts, the trust funds, Harold added, all reverted. Isla turned her fury on me. You can't do this. We have rights. Jared is your son. Jared will always be my son, but being my son doesn't give him the right to steal from me. We weren't stealing. You were tampering with what I was taking to force a transfer of assets. In legal terms, that's theft by deception and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Isla's face went white. Exploitation? Punishable by a lengthy custodial sentence, Harold added matter-of-factly. Jared sank into his chair, the full magnitude of the situation finally hitting him. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about any of it. I studied my son's face, seeing genuine shock and horror there. Didn't you, or didn't you want to know? Isla said you were just anxious about retiring. She said the supplements would help you relax. And you didn't think to ask what was in them, or why I suddenly needed help relaxing after 43 years of running a company? Jared had no answer. Isla, however, had found her voice again. This is all meaningless, she declared. You're a bitter old man who can't accept that it's time to step aside. Jared, don't let him do this to us. But Jared was looking at her with new eyes. Us? Isla, you just called me weak and pathetic. You admitted to tampering with what my father was taking. What us are you talking about? I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. But Jared, we can fight this. We can prove he's not competent. Stop. Jared's voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. Isla stared at him in disbelief. You're choosing him over me? Over us? I'm choosing right over wrong, finally. The alliance that had seemed so strong that morning shattered completely. Isla grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back with one final attack. You'll regret this, Pierce. Both of you. I know things about this family, about the business. I have documents, recordings, which you obtained illegally, Harold interrupted, and which would make you liable for additional criminal charges. Isla's threat collapsed into empty bluster. She left without another word, her heels clicking angrily down the hallway. Jared remained seated, staring at his hands. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are, son. What happens now? I looked at the signed documents, at Harold and Victor and Margaret, at the son I'd raised and nearly lost to someone else's ambition. Now we go to the board meeting, and I explain why Pierce Industries will be continuing under my leadership for the foreseeable future. Jared nodded slowly. And me? That depends, son. Do you want to earn your place in this company? Really earn it through your own effort and merit? Yes, more than anything. Then we'll start over, from the beginning. The board meeting that afternoon was brief and professional. I announced the cancellation of the succession plan, citing new information that had come to light. The directors, most of whom had worked with me for decades, accepted the decision without question. Isla's attempts to contact board members directly were unsuccessful. Her access to company systems had been revoked that morning, and security had been instructed not to admit her to the building. By evening, the legal and financial machinery had completed its work. Isla found herself locked out of the house she'd considered hers, unable to access accounts she'd thought were under her control, and facing the prospect of criminal charges if she pursued her threats. Jared spent that night in a hotel, not because I'd thrown him out, but because he needed time to process the magnitude of what had almost happened. I spent it in my office, reviewing the documents that had nearly cost me everything and planning for a future I'd almost lost to someone who mistook kindness for weakness. The next morning, Jared called. Dad, I'd like to come home, if you'll have me. The door's always been open, son, for you. And Isla? Isla made her choices. Now she lives with the consequences. 6 months later, Jared was working in the company mailroom, learning the business from the ground up. Isla had moved back to her hometown, her divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. And I was still running Pierce Industries, with a clearer understanding than ever of the difference between family loyalty and earned respect. Sometimes the most important legacy a father can leave his son isn't money or property or position. Sometimes it's the knowledge that actions have consequences and that real strength comes from facing those consequences with integrity. Isla had been right about one thing. It was time for a new beginning. She just hadn't understood that new beginnings sometimes require ending things that should never have started.